I suppose everywhere is space if you think about it. This time we watch Season 4, Episode 1, Space Travelers.
The one that works because we really care about the characters.
Mm-hmm. But first, some follow-up. Congratulations to Beth for her excellent job as now, I guess, guest host.
Pinch hoster, yes. Welcome back, Adam.
Yes, thank you.
It's been about 3 years in terms of how the world feels right now since you last were on. I can't even remember how we do this show anymore. It must be a distant, hazy memory for you.
Not to mention, we had done things so far in advance the last time we recorded. It's like we recorded Master Ninja 2 in like February. Yeah. So it is a long time.
I mean, when I recorded that episode with Beth, we were thinking about doing it in person.
Yeah, boy, how times have changed. Now, of course, we all serve the great humongous as we go siphoning gas from car to car and, giving our extra goods to him for protection.
For those of you listening in the future, we're recording this in April 2020, aka week 8 or 9 of this new world order.
Yes, so we should go over all the major news events just in case, like people forget what happened. Naturally, of course, Americans were glued to the Bronco chase of one O.J. Simpson.
Yes, so we're going to be doing a movie that features some extreme social isolation. But before we get to that, Adam, did you in fact listen to the last episode?
I did. I really enjoyed it. I wish I got an egg cream.
Well, that's true. Well, next time I can actually see you, I'll make you one. But
Hooray!
You may recall that there was a bit where I talked about an album called Worm in My Egg Cream by Weird Paul Petrosky. I think I'm saying that right. I can't remember now. I'm sorry, Paul. But do you remember that?
Yes, I do. I haven't listened to the album though. But did you acquire said album? Is that not where this is going?
That is indeed where this is going. You might recall that I asked for him to release the tapes, but I wasn't going to contact him myself. I wanted to see if this could happen through the magic of podcasting, and indeed it did. I am proud to report that the day that episode was released, I was contacted by Mr. Weird Paul Petrosky, who was kind enough to send me a copy of said album, which consists, as you may remember, of 16 songs based on the scene from Squirm, where the worm ends up in the egg cream. All 16 tracks are called Worm in My Egg Cream. I have now listened to that album, and I understand why he didn't put it up on his Bandcamp.
Wait, not even one for like a token one they'd slip on the best of album?
Not even a one.
Aw. So does it have a Wesley Willis quality?
I mean, maybe a little bit, but it's entirely a triumph. It's a wonderful album. I'm completely glad I got a chance to listen to it. I don't want all of our listeners to hound Weird Paul for copies of it, but if you do happen to run across it, it's really great. But the reason why he can't really release it is because every track is him singing over a famous instrumental. So he's written lyrics, and the lyrics are different for each song, and he keeps finding new ways of changing it up a bit. But like from the Star Wars theme to the stripper song to and I know one of our listeners at least will be very excited to find out, to Telstar.
Oh, yes. That was going to be my next question.
Yes. Well, it's true. It's really great. They're really inventive. Thank you very much for sending that along, and congratulations on having done such a great thing, 26 years ago? Good job.
It feels much longer.
I know. But yes, so that's that. I will send it to you. You'll get to appreciate it. I think you'll really enjoy it.
All right. Well, I'm totally down for it. This will be interesting. Now, if only someone can dig up the surely the initial notes, if not demo recordings of one Bernard Herrmann when he decided to record the score for Squirm, but had to cancel.
All right. Well, we've got a really long and tedious movie to talk about this time around, so maybe we should get to it.
All right, let's do this as we do best, long and tediously.
This time we watched Season 4, Episode 1, Marooned. Space Travelers. Richard Crenna, James Franciscus, and Gene Hackman play 3 astronauts who have been sent into space for a 6-month mission. But they start getting kind of loopy around month 5, so maybe they should come home a little early. Except, whoopsie, Houston, we have a problem. The engines failed. They're marooned. I mean, they're space travelers, except they're not traveling anywhere. Oh, that's timely. Anyway, their wives are brought into NASA HQ, and it's certainly not to say goodbye to the astronauts for the last time. No, surely they're coming home. Gregory Peck, the head honcho at NASA, is pretty ready to let them die, but NASA decides to send up an experimental rocket to try to collect them. But there are some delays due to weather issues, and now there's not enough oxygen for 3 men to survive. Gregory Peck seems almost delighted to strongly suggest that one of them should do the honorable thing and kick that nasty breathing habit. Richard Crenna, the commander of the crew, says he's just going outside and maybe a few minutes. But as soon as he's gone, a Russian cosmonaut arrives out of nowhere and offers some spare oxygen. Franciscus and Hackman are too oxygen depleted to see the irony. Anyway, eventually the rescue mission arrives and saves the 2 survivors, and this long, slow slog of a movie is over. The end.
Meanwhile, on the Satellite of Love, Tom Servo is performing an escaped artist routine with Crow, who's now calling himself the Great Crowdini. Tom points a lit cannon in Crow's face while the gangly yellow robot is suspended upside down with steel chains. Now don't worry, he saw Teller do this. In one of the closest things this show's had to a cliffhanger, Crow loses the key, which seems to operate under its own unique laws of physics, and the cannon fires just as we cut to commercial. Now don't worry, we return from break with Crow safe, albeit not in one piece. As any good Boy Scout would, he chewed his own head off before the cannon fired. Back in Deep 13, Dr. Clayton Forrester and TV's Frank mourn the failure of 1991's Damon Wayans' Bruce Willis action vehicle, The Last Boy Scout. If it fails at the box office, will it prevent the return of Bruno? For this week's Invention Exchange, Joel presents us with the Dollaroid, a Polaroid camera that prints your picture on the dollar bill. The Mads offer Kleenex tissues with infamous faces on them, so that you may spew your snotum, spittle, and phlegm on the likes of Sinbad, Pat Buchanan, and Geechee Guy. Believe me, this sketch works even better in the time of COVID-19. Next segment, Joel and the bots list a variety of items we have to thank the space program for, including white corpuscles, a woozle named Peanut, and Jim Belushi. Following that, Joel and Tom play astronauts in a cardboard space shuttle, while Crow shows off his impressive Gregory Peck and David Jansen impressions.
You got a bear in there and a plane wrap around the 12 bucket.
Enough with the CB lingo. The only reason we did this is because you do such a killer peck.
10-4 killer peck. You got the rusty load running east out of Needletown.
In our penultimate sketch, Joel asks the bots to ponder what it would be like to be trapped in space, only for the bots to razz him because they're cute robots who don't need oxygen. Damn. Joel's little robot buddies are colder than space itself. In the final segment, Joel plays a shell game, Find the Finder of Lost Loves, where he tasks the bots with finding the David Jansen action figure he's hidden among the shells. Then Joel shows off some cute artwork sent by fans. The end. Marooned!
Marooned.
Sorry, space travelers. Space
travelers. No matter what you call it by, it's not a fun watch.
No, although I am really, really grateful that we did not watch the uncut movie at any point for this.
Did you have a little taste of it?
I did, yes, and I have a little note in the Shallow 13 all about it.
Oh, good. We'll get to that when we get to it, just like how this movie's plot works.
So we won't get to it.
We won't get to it, or we'll pack everything interesting into the last 5 minutes.
I've got to say, it's really impressive that Gregory Peck managed to deliver an entire performance without moving his face.
I think it kind of works for that. Like, he's the one I buy it in as a NASA administrator. Like, it totally makes sense.
Oh, sure.
But we'll get to that, I suppose. This is a very good episode featuring a movie that offers them a lot of space to make jokes in.
No pun intended.
Well...
Or is it? Crypt Keeper or not?
But yeah, no, it's a good one. It's a nice one.
Yeah, I think for me, I would say the highlights are in the first chunk of the movie where it is just dead air that they have to fill. Like, there's at least 5 minutes on ducks alone.
That first bit, up until the first commercial break, after they've started seeing the movie, is one of my favorite stretches of MST3K. It's just, I mean, I already referenced the line about how the reason this movie works is because we care about the characters.
Yeah, there's a lot of good stuff. I would say specifically, like, the episode really shines at the beginning when nothing is happening, like more nothing than usual for this movie, and at the very, very end when stuff finally starts happening. Although my favorite riff of the whole thing is probably just there's a particularly well photographed shot of everybody in their spacesuits and helmets, and Jill just says, "Hey, it's the residents."
Yes. Oh, I mean, in terms of the movie, there is like one scene that's any good, I think, which is the scene where their wives come in to talk to them over the space telecom and basically have a chance to say one last goodbye to them before they potentially die. It's a really well done scene. Like, first off, we actually have characters who are expressing emotion, which, as you know, astronauts and NASA administrators are not allowed to do.
Nope.
And I don't know, maybe it's partially because it's really resonant with some things that are happening right now, where people are having to say goodbye to loved ones without being anywhere physically near them. Like, it just really hit me more than usual, that scene. But that scene kind of comes out of nowhere and doesn't lead to anything in terms of the movie.
No, you sort of realize that the real story is the astronauts' wives.
Yeah.
That's
Or
the
it should
movie.
be.
That's what the movie should be.
Yeah.
And it occurs to me that, you know, while this movie is incredibly tedious as an adult, not in a sexy way, but an adult, you know, drama about space travelers
Who are marooned.
Yes. You know, it doesn't really work because there is nothing to react to. Like, if the rising tension with Gene Hackman was played up, that would probably lead to something, but that kind of falls flat.
Yeah. There's no interaction between the three astronauts except Hackman's acting a little bit more or chewing the scenery a little bit more.
They definitely made sure to moisten him for his close-ups.
Yes.
But it is a little flat, and it's one of those things where it's like, this really suffers from being a, for the time, big budget movie.
Right.
Like, this would have been better off if it was made as essentially like a live television play, and we're going back and forth and characters are forced to talk because we can't show anything.
So you'd rather this were Rocket Ship XM?
Yes, that's what I'm saying. Why aren't all movies Rocket Ship XM?
Well, maybe we should just sort of zip along and get right into it then, and move on to our next segment, where we're going to be talking about, like, these movies about space and why they're so slow and dreary.
Well, I think it's because space itself, it's perfect for the tone. It's perfect for the atmosphere. It's perfect for the environment, because, you know what? Space itself is just a dreary place to be.
Yeah, space is one of those things, and space traveling is one of those things where it's exciting in theory, but if you actually think about it, it takes forever to go anywhere. Nothing changes. Nothing ever happens. It's just a lot of nothing. And I think some of these movies that are famous for being space movies, 2001 is the classic example, but this is sort of in that vein, are just achingly slow because that is the pace of space. And because you sort of want to capture some of that grandeur as well. Like, space is this new and exciting thing in the 60s that we're actually properly encountering for the first time. And the kind of majesty, the, I guess, otherworldliness, but also the incredible slowness of it all is something that I guess these filmmakers wanted to capture. And unfortunately, you really have to Kubrick it to make it work. Otherwise, you just get tedium like this.
Absolutely. Like, 2001, like a lot of films that are slower but still quality, I find the slowness a strength, because it is inviting you to take in that atmosphere, but it's also kind of perfectly measured in the sense that you're trying to ground space in as much realism as possible. You're trying to create convincing sets and props. You're trying to make it seem like it's real people up there and not actors in funny costumes. And so, one, that allows you to accept more fantastical things like HAL. And it also provides such a nice contrast with the beginning, which features some pretty goofy ape suits.
That's true. They're really well done goofy ape suits.
Oh, yeah. Like it's an art there that I think is lost, which is, I think in previous decades, people could really appreciate special effects as stylish rather than realistic, whereas now everything has to be realistic or it's bad. That's a lost art.
Yeah. And I think this is actually one of the reasons why 2001 works, and especially perhaps still works, is that that's not actually what space looks like, right? Spacecraft don't look like that. That is a particular shade of modern futurism, Tomorrowlandism that just didn't come to pass. Whereas Space Travelers does more or less look like what the Apollo missions looked like. Like, they are more accurate.
And I think that's just it. It's like with Kubrick's way of shooting, as well as like the incredible work that went into those models, you have something that is like a feast for the eyes, even if it's not what would have been used. And I think that by offering such a gentle pace, it allows us to like, oh, you're not treating it like sci-fi, you're treating it as if it's some sort of real story that's unfolding. And again, like, you have that perfect contrast with how crazy the movie gets later on, and it packs such a punch, whereas you're barely able to rise out of the slumbers for when they finally get rescued.
Yeah. You never cared, but you really don't care by the end of the movie.
No, and I realized that I'd seen this episode before, but I didn't remember it. So I just sort of sat there as the Russian cosmonaut tries to save Hackman and Krenna. And I'm just there, or Hackman and Jansen, sorry. And I was just thinking, man, oh man, they both die, right? And this whole thing was pointless.
It's Hackman and Franciscus, but yes. Yeah, that scene always confused me, and partially it's because the American astronauts lost in space are confused by what this cosmonaut is doing because they're so oxygen deprived. So, the whole thing is just a big confusing mess that feels like it didn't need to happen. Although I guess in terms of the plot, if we're really going to dissect this, like, it's interesting that there is a cosmonaut who is able to deliver oxygen to them, and it seemingly never occurred to NASA to ask. There's no, at least in the version that we see on MST3K, maybe something was edited, but like, he comes out of nowhere. Yeah. And Gregory Peck seems to have no idea that this was a possibility.
No, but then again, it's like, I think all of Gregory Peck's energy was being sucked to like his jowls to make sure that his face was as long as possible. It looks like the damn monolith from 2001.
So I also wonder whether the real space heads, let's call them, whether that's the thing that they like about these movies, is the kind of glacial pace that captures a particular aspect of space. Last year was the 50th anniversary of the moon landing, and so around that time I watched a documentary called For All Mankind, which is not the new TV series that... Don't worry about that. I haven't watched that. But this is a 1989 documentary film that is entirely made out of NASA footage. Directed by a guy named Al Reinert. Brian Eno does the score. It's very slow. And in the original cut, apparently, there was no voiceover. There was no narration. And there was no sort of documentary sounds of Buzz Aldrin or whoever saying things. It was just the beauty of the ships going up and the rocket launch and so forth. So they had to add a whole bunch of things to make it even vaguely commercial.
Wow. Was it originally released under the title Koyana Spacey?
Yeah, it's definitely less exciting a movie than Koyaanisqatsi, which I kind of like. It was
I love Koyaanisqatsi.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. For All Mankind, there's definitely some good things about it, but it was not as thrilling a viewing experience as I hoped for. It definitely goes on a bit long.
Yeah, I think that there is something to be said about using space to create this kind of gentle atmosphere, for lack of a better term, this kind of, awe-inspiring beauty. You can only play that trick so many times, but if you have the money and you have something that could be visually interesting, I think that's worth doing in, say, a drama with some sci-fi elements or a full-on science fiction film. The curse of Star Wars is that all ships are buzzy and fast now, and it's like, why don't we have slow space movies anymore?
Yeah, I don't know. I think Star Wars did get things right in that it certainly helps if you want to have an exciting movie to have the ships go fast and whiz by. Like, that's fun to watch.
Oh, sure. It's just that not everything should have copied it.
It's true. There should be more than one kind of ship in the universe.
Yeah. I mean, both Alien and Aliens are not more exciting because we get super fast space travel in either of them.
True, but although I haven't seen them, my understanding is that at least Alien is all about what's happening on the ship rather than where the ship is going.
Yeah, and I think the director's cut of Aliens runs about 2.5 hours, where one of those hours is just them getting to the planet. So, that's what I liked. And I've got to come to bat for a hot take. A hot take that I must offer.
All right, lay it on me.
Which I suspect will be popular, and thus will become a hot cake. But I absolutely adore a little movie called Star Trek: The Motion Picture.
Star Trek 1.
Yes.
That's an odd-numbered one, right? Those are the ones that I'm not supposed to trust.
Oh, no. See, here's the thing. That's wrong. Because, okay, if William Shatner is in it, approach with caution.
Okay.
But if William Shatner and DeForest Kelley are in it, then it's smooth sailing.
Okay.
Yes, because all of those movies are good, except for... No, they're all great. They're all entertaining. The only one that is like a third season episode of Star Trek and thus entertainingly bad, like Spock's Brain, is the one that Shatner directed, where William Shatner meets God in outer space and tells him to fuck off.
But yes, Star Trek #1.
Yes, Star Trek #1 was directed by Robert Wise, and this was seen as an important kind of film, and he was lending it a certain kind of gravitas. Wise, of course, is well known for his directing of The Haunting, as well as The Sound of Music.
Oh.
Yeah. And so he is a big deal. Even though this is towards the end of his career, it's still a big deal that he's directing it. So it's not paced like Star Trek. It's paced like 2001.
It's paced like The Sound of Music. There's constantly breaking for song.
And, well, I mean, it certainly helps that Christopher Plummer, I guess to bring things to a perfect circle, is in the final original cast Star Trek movie.
Oh, very good.
But yes, it was a combination of things. Like, part of it was deliberate and part of it was just the amount of work that had to go for all the elaborate effects. It had to be kind of last minute. So when they got the footage, they more or less had to use all of it. And so you get these beautiful, and I mean beautiful, montages of just color and cloud effects and lightning effects, nice animated lightning effects. They don't do that anymore. Hand-drawn lightning effects, all set to an Oscar-nominated score, and indeed probably my favorite score of all time, by Jerry Goldsmith.
Ah, very good.
So it's a beautiful movie, and what's funny is that the criticism that it usually gets, aside from the fact that it's like, you could leave to make a cup of tea and then like come back, and then you could finish your tea and you could take a phone call from your mom and you will have no problem following the movie. Because it takes a while, but I like taking a while to get there. There's a lot of other pleasures in the movie, but specifically in regards to this aspect of space movies that we're talking about, one, I think that totally works, and two, the other criticism it gets is that it sort of remakes an episode of the original series, which it does, but it tells that story better, so why not?
So the other movie that we probably should bring up, because it's the movie that I guess most people are going to think about when they think about this movie, is Apollo 13, which I had intended to watch before we came into this recording studio. But no, that did not happen.
Yeah, same here. I mean, I watched it in the 90s. But...
I have to admit, I really didn't want to watch it either. But maybe I'm wrong. Is it slow-paced like this, or is it snappier?
It's definitely snappier.
I mean, I guess wheat growing is snappier than this movie, but I mean, in general, is it snappy?
I would say it's a lot more sharply made. I mean, if memory serves, isn't Apollo 13 directed by Ron Howard?
I think so.
Yeah, who is, again, a director who is known for his extremely commercial instincts. So my memory of it anyway is that it never threatened to bore the audience with like long, beautiful moments of space and a slow, steady buildup. Like it's not exactly like fast paced. No one jumps from a space shuttle and lands on a different space shuttle. The Silver Surfer does not rescue them. Nothing terribly exciting happens out of reality. Any plot elements that would be out of reality, but it's a perfectly fine populist drama, which could describe most of Ron Howard's career.
All right. Well, that's good to know. I guess I also should point out that the Apollo 13 mission itself that had the disaster was in 1970, which is, of course, the year after Marooned came out, which means that Marooned isn't based on Apollo 13, which is something that I thought when I first saw it as a kid. But I just wanted to clear that up in case anyone was laboring under the incorrect assumption that I was laboring under for so many decades.
Oh, Gene Hackman, he's good in anything he does, really.
He's really good.
Man, let me ask you a question. Is there a man more ironically named than Gene Hackman?
For he is not a hack nor a man?
Well, he's not a hack, man.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
He's good in anything.
That's what I found. That's what I have generally found, with one exception, Marooned.
Yes, fair. He's doing the best he can. He's certainly the most exciting actor who isn't a wife on this one.
I got pretty excited when I saw a certain famous sitcom dad who gets pointed out by Joel and the Bots in the episode. But again, more on him later.
So I'm looking over the list of films that Gene Hackman has been in, and I have to admit, I have not seen very many of them. I mean, surprise, surprise. Let's see. I've seen The Poseidon Adventure. I don't remember him in it, but I do kind of love that movie.
Big Shelley Winters fan?
Yeah, I mean, you have to be, right? Like, it's the law. I've also seen Ants, but that's a Woody Allen film, so we're not going to talk about that. And I guess I've seen Superman. I don't know. Maybe not from beginning to end.
Well, that too is also, like, again, a very nice, slow-paced movie. It takes about a good 45, maybe even an hour before Clark Kent grows up, moves to Metropolis, and is Superman.
Well, that's because Superman is a boring character, and so the less time you spend with him, the better.
Chris, you haven't watched Superman, because otherwise you wouldn't believe that.
All right.
Yeah.
Fair.
Christopher Reeve finds what's interesting about Superman. However, Gene Hackman's in the movie, and it's weird, and I think this is why not everybody loves Superman the motion picture, because of Hackman. And it's not that there's anything wrong with his performance, per se, but everything in the movie is sincere. Everything in the movie is a love letter to Superman and what makes that character work, and what makes that character, what essentially people who have that same old complaint of, oh, how can you make Superman interesting? He's boring. He's a god man who saves people and cats from trees and such. It finds a way to, again, get you invested in the roots of the character by showing off that, like, Superman's greatest superpower isn't that he has all the things that he can do, which includes such powers as rebuilding the Great Wall of China by just staring at it, thanks to Superman 4, also with Gene Hackman. But is that his greatest power is empathy? Is how much more human he is than the rest of us?
Ah. Well, that is nice.
Oh, yeah. And you couldn't ask for a better performance than Christopher Reeves in that movie. You'll just fall in love with Superman. But Gene Hackman, who had been essentially, if I understand correctly, the input that he got in regards to his casting and the production, or at least the writing for the character that survived the shooting script, had remained stagnant from earlier drafts, which were written more in the style of the 60s Batman.
Ah.
So you have this ultra sincere movie with a comedy villain.
Does it work?
He's essentially playing it the same way Cesar Romero does, so it's very entertaining.
Oh, that's good. I'm looking over the list now, and I realize that there is another Hackman movie that I have seen. I just didn't realize he was in it. I, of course, have seen Young Frankenstein many times.
Oh, I thought you were going to say the Sam Raimi Western Quick and the Dead.
No, he has a real bit part in Young Frankenstein, so I didn't realize it was him even, but he's, sure, he can act in it. He's good in it. No, I haven't seen any Sam Raimi, I'm afraid.
Aw.
I haven't seen a lot of things, if listeners haven't realized this.
Quick and the Dead is on Netflix. So if you've ever wondered what it'd be like if a Clint Eastwood-style spaghetti western was made, but the heavy Lee Van Cleef type was played by Gene Hackman, and the Clint Eastwood role was filled by Sharon Stone, then you got Quick and the Dead.
Hey, he was in Twilight.
But not the Vampire Twilight.
Oh, you're right. That's too early.
Yeah, it's a different one.
It's got Susan Sarandon in it.
Yeah. She would have been ideal for playing a high school teen.
Still is, as far as I'm concerned.
But no, like generally speaking, like I've seen Gene Hackman in a lot of great, flashy, scenery-chewing roles, which is something he excels in. And in fact, watching Marooned is a bit like watching Samuel L. Jackson in The Red Violin. I don't know if you've seen that.
I have, weirdly enough, but yes.
Yeah. Well,
It left no impression.
and that's just it. You have Samuel L. Jackson, who is treasured for his main skill. He delivers a fine performance in The Red Violin. However, when you have Samuel L. Jackson, you want to see him ham it up and scream a lot.
Yes.
That's what he's really good at. And he's so good at it that he's done it for decades and no one is sick of it. But he delivers a subtle, soft-spoken performance. And again, well, it's nice that he can do that. But where's my screaming? And with Gene Hackman, he usually is at his best when he's allowed to just, have bits of scenery dribbling down his chin, because he's absolutely terrific as Popeye Doyle in The French Connection. And he's utterly, utterly hilarious and quite sad as the family patriarch in The Royal Tenenbaums.
Oh, yeah. These are all movies that I should have watched by now.
Yeah. Although I will have to contradict myself slightly, because even though, like I said, this smaller, more human performance that he's giving in Marooned is like not necessarily my cup of tea for Hackman, his best work is in Francis Ford Coppola's The Conversation.
Which is a very understated film, I guess.
Yes.
Ah.
And he spends most of the time not really saying a word.
Oh, he's doing mime.
That's essentially it. He is. It's essentially like Silent Movie. In fact, it's exactly like Silent Movie, because in both films, the only line of dialogue is Marcel Marceau saying no.
Yeah, they liked it so much the first time they had to bring him back for another movie with the same gimmick.
Weirdly short-lived 70s trend.
I mean, look, if Bruce Willis's career continues its downward slide, it could be a setback to the forces of evil everywhere.
Our friends the Mads are quite concerned about the career of Bruce Willis, because if he's doing so poorly these days with The Last Action Hero.
No, it's The Last Boy Scout.
The Last Boy Scout, sorry. Was that also
flop.
Oh, yes, right. If Bruce Willis's latest film, The Last Boy Scout, does as poorly as it's doing, why that'll be the end of his career and all the evil that it wreaks upon the world. So, Bruce Willis, is he good in anything?
Well, I mean, not lately.
I mean, he's really good in that one interview where he's being asked about Die Hard 7 or whatever it was, and he just looks dead. There's a really fantastic segment from a Charlie Brooker special where he's just on an interview show and they're asking him about it and he doesn't care, and they're like, oh, and you used to play harmonica, we've got one here, and they make him play a bit of harmonica and he just looks miserable about what his life has become.
Yeah, Bruce Willis in the last 15 years has come down with a real case of Adam Sandler eyes.
Oh,
He's seen too much.
but will you have his Adam Sandler moment of redemption?
Well, I mean, maybe. Technically, that already happened because that was Pulp Fiction.
That was a long time ago. That was more than 15 years ago.
Yeah. No, that's just it. He was able to spring back a little bit. And you know what? He's good in things, just not lately.
Okay.
It's as though audiences so loved Bruce Willis that his publicists and his estate could not reveal the fact that he actually died sometime in 2003.
And he's been played by Paul McCartney ever since.
Yeah, I mean, say what you will about that terrible CGI version of Peter Cushing in Rogue One. It was not quite as stiff as Bruce Willis has been lately.
Well, back in the day, I watched Moonlighting, which I guess is where he started to become really big. And that and Die Hard, I guess, would have been around the same time.
Yep.
And he was certainly pleasant enough in that, but it was a role where he was, playing somebody who was kind of unlikable in a likable way. And I guess that worked, at least until they had that big kiss, and then Moonlighting lost all of its energy. Anyway, that's an old story.
Well, and see, that raises the question. See, I've seen exactly one episode of Moonlighting, and that, of course, is the famed Atomic Shakespeare.
Yes, that is the best episode, as I recall.
Yeah, and that was really great. It's just that something that's made me really fascinated with Moonlighting, because I'd always heard the stories. It's like, okay, Sybil Shepherd, as she got more and more powerful within the show, but not in the fiction of the show, in terms of production, apparently became harder and harder to work with. And essentially, there was a lot of pressure to resolve the romance, so they did. And of course, the offset thing is that killed the show. But what might have potentially killed the show is every time I hear about moonlighting, I'm hearing stuff that's weird, but not like Atomic Shakespeare weird. Now, Chris, you watched Moonlighting regularly while it was on, right?
Until the big kiss scene, yes, which was a fantastic way for the show to end, and sadly it didn't.
Oh, see, that would have been good. That would have been good. A literal kiss off to viewers.
I mean, that kiss, when they finally kiss, I don't remember exactly how long it actually is, but it felt like it went on for 5 minutes. Like it's just an over-the-top. They keep kissing and rolling over things and kissing. And it was really well done and a really good payoff. But then what do you do?
Well, apparently one of the things they did do is that Maddie, the Sybil Shepherd character,
yes,
had become pregnant.
Yeah, I think so.
And she had become pregnant with Bruce Willis's character's baby.
Yeah.
But she lost the baby.
Yeah.
And already it's like, all right, this is a bit heavy for, this lighthearted tongue-in-cheek show. But apparently the way that this potential new character was written out is we cut to Bruce Willis pretending to be a baby in the womb, singing a song to Sybil Shepherd as he dies.
Oh, yeah, that sounds familiar now that you mention it.
That really happened, apparently.
It really lost it.
Yeah, like what you're describing is as bad as the middle part of the second season of Twin Peaks.
Now that I'm looking over the list of Bruce Willis films, I realize I have seen several more of these than I've seen Gene Hackman films, which feels wrong.
That's very wrong, I'm afraid.
I mean, not that any of the ones I've seen have been particularly bad or that he was bad in, like, Fifth Element, for example. It's a good casting.
Yes.
He is by no means the best part of that film, but he's perfectly fine casting in that.
Yes. Well, I mean, he that's just it. It's like Bruce Willis used to bring enough of what he was good at. He almost seemed like Clint Eastwood in a way, in that he was a limited actor who understood his limitations and knew that playing within his range endeared him to audiences. So I don't know, either he or his handlers, quite smartly with film roles, would play the Bruce Willis wisecracking, smart aleck, bit of a hard ass, but a heart of gold character. And I don't know, but Bruce Willis also desperately wanted to be a music star, hence the return of Bruno.
Yes. Let's not talk about that. It's too sad.
Plus, if you say it 3 times, a new album appears.
Hey, everybody, it's time for the Shallow 13.
It's time for the Apollo 13. No, let me say it again. It's time for the Shallow 13. 13 tiny tidbits about this film that are tragically lost in space. Go, Adam, go.
First off, the fun fact you probably already know. Space Travelers, better known as Marooned, is so far the only MST3K experiment to win an Academy Award. Yes, John Sturges' film nabbed an Oscar for visual effects provided by one Roby Robinson. More impressive is that Roby Robinson found time to do such great effects and write and record the night they drove Old Dixie down in the same year.
Dear Crow, Marooned star James Franciscus didn't appear in The Finder of Lost Loves, but he did play another unlucky astronaut in 1970's Beneath the Planet of the Apes. This Apes sequel, released a mere 6 months after Marooned, has Franciscus going through the same routine as Charlton Heston in the first film. In other words, confused astronaut, tortured by apes, because Heston only committed to brief appearances at the beginning and end of the film.
Now, don't let the rehashed Franciscus A plot fool you. Beneath the Planet of the Apes' far more interesting B plot focuses on telepathic mutants who worship an atomic bomb, which should be familiar to Misties who've seen what happens to Bobo and Future Earth in MST3K 804, The Deadly Mantis, which we talked about in episode 25. Go listen to it. You have nothing better to do. Now, the film is downright Lynchian in these mutant segments, culminating in what is easily the bleakest ending of the Planet of the Apes movies, a series noted for its extremely bleak endings.
But what was The Finder of Lost Loves, anyway? Tony Franciosa ran a detective agency specializing in cases where clients are reunited with former flames. Doesn't sound like much, does it? Viewers of the 1984-85 fall season agreed, and the show was axed after 23 episodes, leaving nothing behind but its Burt Bacharach theme tune.
We've talked plenty about Gene Hackman and James Franciscus, but what about the third astronaut? That's Richard Crenna, best known for his role as the morally ambiguous Colonel Troutman in First Blood, and the unambiguously heroic Colonel Troutman in Rambo First Blood Part 2 and Rambo 3. Rest assured, despite having the same name, there's no way those Colonel Troutmans are the same character.
During one of the many scenes at NASA Mission Control, Joel spots a sandy-haired man with a John Waters mustache and calls him
Punky Brewster's dad, the early years.
Sure enough, it's a young George Gaines, who went through a career renaissance in the 80s with the aforementioned Punky Brewster and his role as the gentle, buffoonish Commandant Eric Lassard in Police Academy. Well, we say young, but a more accurate term would be youngish, as Gaines was well past middle age by the time he was cast in Marooned.
There's another MST3K connection for our proud Punky Papa. In 1980, Gaines had a recurring role on the long-running soap opera General Hospital, which MST3K would riff short segments of in several fourth-season episodes. Exponential gains!
According to the IMDb, there is no original score for Marooned. Frankly, this approach is for The Birds, by which I mean Alfred Hitchcock did it earlier in The Birds. Also, it's inaccurate. For more information on the music of Marooned, we join Adam on location for another Microscorner.
Not only is there a distinct synth musical score over the original opening credits, but Richard Crenna's death scene is also given a gloomy musical cue in Marooned. In both instances, this music was replaced with music by FVI's house composer, Carl Demmer.
Carl Demmer would like to see you.
Hilariously, Demmer reuses the exact same music he composed for the opening credits of Pod People for Crenna's somber death scene.
Frank Capra was originally going to direct Marooned, but couldn't get the studio to agree to his proposed $3 million budget. When John Sturges came in to direct, the film's budget ballooned to $8 million.
You'll never guess who gave this movie 3 out of 4 stars. No, not Leonard Maltin, Roger Ebert. He concludes his mixed but overall positive review with, Marooned isn't very interesting from a stylistic point of view, and the actors tend to get buried beneath the technology, but it does tell an exciting story. Maybe exciting meant something different in 1969.
Well, I mean, Marooned sure is boring, right? Well, no. Or at least it's an acquired taste that I don't share, but director Alfonso Cuarón is a fan, telling Wired magazine that he watched the movie repeatedly as a child. Cuarón included a clip from the film in his Oscar-winning Netflix film, Roma.
Oh, and we would be remiss without mentioning that Marooned director John Sturges cast, you guessed it, Donald Pleasance, in such films as The Great Escape, The Eagle Has Landed, and The Hallelujah Trail. Yes, we at It's Just a Show are pleased to announce that this podcast is, first and foremost, a Donald Pleasance fan cast, and all MST3K facts are incidental to serving our Lord and Master, the spirit of dark and lonely water himself, Donald Pleasance. Thank you, and good night.
And that's time.
Would you like to hear a story, Chris?
Yeah, you mentioned FVI and their house composer Carl Demmer. So that's Film Ventures International, which we talked about a little while ago when we did some movie or other. Which one was it?
Master Ninja 2, I think? Oh, no, Master Ninja 1.
Yeah, both the Masters Ninja were Film Venture treatments. They did this one, of course, which is why we have a different name. But I wondered if there's any more to the FVI story that's worth sharing.
Yeah, well, we've talked about the Film Ventures International that you would know from this show, which is the video version, specifically as a video imprint back in the 90s and late 80s.
But there's a VR version now?
Well, I don't know about right now, but in the past, of course, they were distributors of drive-in fare.
Oh, fun.
Yes. So essentially, Film Ventures International was originally founded by a fellow by the name of Edward L. Montoro, and he essentially got his start by distributing foreign genre movies like Great White, which was a ripoff of Jaws that was so shameless that Universal Studios sued to keep it out of theaters. And he also is responsible for giving the gift that is Juan Piquer Simon's Pieces, one of the most inept slasher movies of all time, one of the funniest films I've ever seen, and more importantly, Simone, it should be familiar to all Misties because he directed and wrote Pod People.
Right. I was like, that name sounds familiar, but that's it. Yes.
Yeah. And the lead guy from Pod People, the Idiot Control Now singer, is the lead of Pieces.
Of a horror movie.
Yes.
Does he get killed or is he the baddie?
He's the goodie, I guess. Does he get killed? Well, the film ends with his dick and balls being ripped off.
Okay, that's good enough for me.
Yep.
Did they do it method style? Like, did he really have it done?
Well, that's the question, Chris, because to lend a certain verisimilitude to the scene, we do have a full frontal nude scene from him very early on in the movie.
Huh. That's a thing.
Yeah, so if you've ever been curious, Pieces is your film. So yeah, he's responsible for that. He had also distributed another popular Jaws type ripoff, but was Jaws on land. Thus, we got William Girdler's Grizzly.
Was he behind Squirm as well?
No, not as far as I could tell. But he was essentially, he's this distributor guy who's trying to become, big into the movie business by the time he was in his 40s, and he was set up in Atlanta. And Great White, I should again point out that he didn't produce the film. He had merely acquired the rights to a cheap Italian knockoff, but it was a little too cheap and a little too knockoff and frankly a little too Italian. And so he faced legal trouble, and he isn't stupid. Montoro suspected that this would happen, and to throw potential lawyers off the scent of copyright, be blood in the water, so to speak, he enclosed Film Ventures International inside the limited liability shield of a Georgia corporation and funded the rest through FEI as part of a limited partnership. There's a very special law for all of this, so it's he was kind of a canny businessman at the very least.
Yeah, he had a lawyer.
But as I said, he was successfully sued by Universal Studios.
Oh, well, okay.
Now, at this point, you have a major setback. He's lost millions. And Montoro and his wife, Joanne, are now getting a divorce. And she had served as essentially the secretary for him at FEI. Now, rather than face financial repercussions, because she was going to get half the company, and she was also going to get substantial alimony from Montoro, Montoro fled the country in 1984, took over $1 million in company money with him. What do you suppose happened to Edward L. Montoro, Chris?
He had a lovely life in some Caribbean tax shelter.
Essentially, that's probably true. No one knows.
Oh, even better. Wait.
Unsolved mystery.
Wait. That happened. That must have happened before the FBI that we know and love from MST3K.
Exactly. This is the original FBI. And then essentially when the company was taken over, it became an even worse thing.
Whoa. Okay, so it was bought out by somebody else who wanted to do even more dubious IP work.
Yeah. They were bought by INI Entertainment, which they're the ones who produce the cheapy home video releases that we know and love.
That's also what that Bob Dylan song is inspired by. Anyway, wow. All right. So we don't know what happened to the original FBI.
Yeah, he's essentially the film version of D.B. Cooper. He is a cheap knockoff of D.B. Cooper. He is D.B. Cooper with the name scratched out and a new name written in. But yeah, if you or anyone you love has any information about the whereabouts of the presumably still alive Edward L. Montoro, please send your information and tips to It's Just a Show, care of Scruff McGruff, Chicago, Illinois, 60652.
Don't worry. If you're listening, just write in. We'll be very discreet, just like we're being very discreet about where you can find the Worm in My Egg Cream album.
And help us take a bite out of crime.
Well, we've had a lot of fun talking about some space travelers who are marooned, and I suppose there's lots of other things we could talk about, but time is running short and we're almost out of oxygen. So do you have one more thing to bring up?
I sure do, Chachi.
No.
Now, whoa! I'm sorry. Did we just have our first famous guest star, Chris? It sounds as though Dennis Miller, the star of the hit film HBO presents Tales from the Crypts, Bordello of Blood,
oh God,
had just entered our podcast studio, which is just two guys in separate rooms.
In separate cities.
Yes.
But he wasn't invited, okay? I'm going to have to edit him out.
Oh, well, that's okay.
We can't hear you, Dennis. We can't hear you.
Honestly, while I absolutely love the first thing that he said, the minute that he started talking about how the country changed in 2001, I didn't want to hear anymore.
What does Dennis Miller have to do with Marooned?
Well, it's hard to think of it now, but there was a time in which Dennis Miller was a popular, present, and well-liked rising star.
Yes.
And this is crazy for youngsters to believe, but if you are as old as Chris or I,
yeah, no,
do you remember liking Dennis Miller? I do.
absolutely. I really enjoyed him when he was on Saturday Night Live doing the news anchor position. And then he got his own show and I remember liking it. I think he had some specials that I enjoyed. Yeah. No, he was good. And then he wasn't. He really wasn't.
Boy, nobody got less good so fast as Dennis Miller in 2001.
but I still don't know why we're talking about him.
Well, he has a very special tie to this episode. Kevin Murphy recounts in the Amazing Colossal Episode Guide, which I'm holding Beth's copy of. I managed to snag it before COVID.
Oh, nice.
But essentially, the gang at MST3K were friends with a comedy writer named Nick Backey.
Nick Backey.
Yes, sorry. Well, but I was going to mention his famous...
Who was the Ed McMahon of the Night After Night with Alan Havey show. And later went on to voice a cat on Sabrina the Teenage... whatever she was called. Sabrina the Teenage Witch.
A cat? The cat?
The cat?
The cat. He was Salem, the only talking cat in the show.
Yeah. That's the one.
Yeah. It's not like Samurai Pizza Cats where there's a bunch of them running around.
I only know him from Night After Night, and then he left, and suddenly he was on some sitcom, and I watched it once because of him, and I was like, no, I'm done.
Wow, it's Nick Backey. I've been saying it wrong all these years. And Chris, even though I've been saying it in public, no one corrected me.
I know. OG Nick Backey fans. There just aren't that many of us out there.
But anywho, Backey is the tie to Dennis Miller because Backey had apparently said that Miller was a fan, so he had invited the folks at MST3K to come watch his short-lived talk show, The Dennis Miller Show, before the hit HBO one, and essentially they were invited to a free taping and to again meet Dennis Miller afterwards. And Kevin Murphy reports in the Amazing Colossal Episode Guide entry on Marooned that Miller just bombed horribly on his own show and came back looking, and I quote, gaunt and pale, looking like Keith Richards in the junkie days before he'd fly off to Switzerland to have all his blood replaced. And essentially, Dennis Miller was so defeated by all of this that the only thing he said to the MST3K folks in attendance was, Marooned is a good movie.
Oh, no.
And he said that the show was slipping because they had done Marooned on the show and that MST3K must have lost its touch.
Okay, so it was in 2001 where he fell off the truck.
The signs were always there. Now, here's an interesting little twist to this.
Okay.
J. Elvis Weinstein has appeared on a fun little podcast that I've discovered that's called Comedy on Vinyl. And comedians and comedy folks show up on this podcast to discuss a record that they are extremely familiar with and perhaps had a particular formative place in their comedy writing career. Weinstein is on to talk about Dennis Miller's first album. And how, though he never considered that album to be particularly important to him, he said upon trying to find an album that he liked when he was younger, that spoke to him. So he put on the record and realized, oh my God, for the first few years of my act, I was a cut rate Dennis Miller.
Oh, no. God, what a horrible thing to realize.
Well, again, this was back when Dennis Miller was charming. So it's like...
Oh, right. But the interview wasn't from back then. He realized this now.
Well, there's a lot of great talk. It's kind of fascinating if you're into stand-up comedy, because there's a lot of talk about how much stand-up comedy has changed from the 80s to the present day. And how it's kind of a perfect time capsule of what stand-up comedy was in the 80s, where you would just take a topic and you had a joke written for it. And really, it's the joke is so kind of small and precise that anyone could have said the joke. And what's really supposed to be funny and what's supposed to connect to the audience is simply your attitude about it. So Dennis Miller has his sort of snide undergrad smart aleck attitude. Someone like Roseanne Barr would be the domestic goddess, and that would be her attitude. And Louis Anderson would be the man who loves to hug. I don't know what Louis Anderson's persona is. Now, Weinstein became such a successful comedian so young. Like, remember, he's like going on the road at 17. Like, he did very well when he started. And he became known as a great joke writer, so people would frequently buy jokes off him. He once sold an entire chunk of his routine to Dennis Miller for $3,000.
Okay.
For the Dennis Miller Show, where Weinstein in this interview says that the bit bombed and he never did it again. Was it the same show?
Josh, if you're listening, get in touch with us. If you've been affected by the issues on this show, if you're either Nick Bakay or Edward L. Montoro, or if you'd like to ask us anything, get in touch with us. Our website is itsjustashow.com, and we're on Twitter at itisjustashow. We're not on Twitter as often as we could be, I suppose, but nevertheless, we'd love to hear from you. This show is made possible by listeners like you. For as little as $1 an episode, you can help us research and record this show, and you can listen to all of our superfan bonus bits. Find out more at itsjustashow.com/Patreon or patreon.com/itsjustashow. And if you want to follow up on anything that was mentioned today, you'll find links in our show notes at itsjustashow.com/episode/68.
Well, that was surprisingly fast-paced and exciting and thrilling. All things that we did not experience in Marooned proper.
Indeed. Well, maybe we'll do something a little more action-packed next time.
All right. Well, you know what? There's only one cure for a film as boring and masculine as Marooned, and that is indeed
Girlstown.
Yay!
Oh, wait, we did that one.
We'll do it again.
All right, Girlstown Part 2, Season 6, Episode 22, Angel's Revenge.
Hey! Wow, I'm surprised they didn't try to make a franchise out of that. I mean, like an action-packed late 70s action type thing that had angels in the title. I mean, it just screams great potential.
I know. I'm gonna call up my good friend Lucy Liu and see what she thinks about this idea of yours.
I'm gonna call up Aaron Spelling and say, "Hey, you know that sound you've been looking for?"
I love this episode.
Oh man, and it's got a cast of thousands. Namely, Jim Backus is in it.
It's not just Jim Backus though. There's so many.
Oh yeah, Claude Akins is also in it.
Pat Buttram is in it. Alan Hale is in it. Jack Palance is in it. Oh my word, everyone is in it.
Well, that's going to be a real feast for the eyes. Something for the men and something for the ladies.
And something for our non-binary friends as well.
For everybody. It's a buffet of flesh.
And of saying no to drugs. Oh, I've been waiting so many episodes for this one. All right, but we'll have to wait a little bit longer. So until then...
In space, no one can hear you yawn.
I just yawned. Did you hear that?
No.
Oh,
No,
it's
we're
'cause I was in space. Yeah. Anyway, take it away, Theme Squad. Quaron included a crypt from the... Nope.
A tale from the crypt.